Hi, welcome to today's show. I have a guest today, Linda Weaver, and our topic is normalizing death. I will tell you more about her, and we'll jump into that in a moment. But first, a special hello to my listeners in Cottonwood, Arizona. It's so funny. You guys are number 2 on all the cities in the whole world. Cottonwood is number 2 now. Oh my goodness, Australia, you still have number 1 and number 3, but thank you. Cottonwood, just for those of you who don't live in this area, is right next to where I live. So they're my neighbor. So I appreciate the local support very much. And welcome to my guest. I've been very excited to have Linda Weaver on the podcast. Let me tell you just briefly about her. She is an end-of-life doula. And if you don't know what that is, you'll find out. She has a PhD in metaphysics, and her specialties are in death and grief. Linda, welcome to the podcast today.
Oh, Ivory, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited about this.
So, I actually asked Linda to come on because I wanted to do a topic of normalizing death. And it's important to me as a person who deals with a lot of people who are grieving, and just the nature of my work. I know there's an afterlife. I know that there's something beyond this current human existence, and I have zero doubt about it, but I think there's a lot of fear. So to you, Linda, what does it mean to normalize death?
Well, normalizing death is like we normalize many other things in our life. It means that we're going to bring it into our sphere of consciousness, take a look at it, and accept it as part of the natural events that occur in our life. It's a particularly frightening one because of what you just said. It's like many of us don't have a belief that there's something afterwards, or we're terrified of what death might be like, or all of those various things that come up for people. I know there's an afterlife.
I do too. And, I think what made me really start thinking about this probably about 15, 16 years ago is people started asking me to be at their side when they passed, or to be at their loved one's side when they passed. And I was always happy to do that if it could possibly happen, because it's a very beautiful, sacred experience, and it's a spiritual experience. And that's what made me really start thinking about how we need to change how we look at death. Why do you feel we really need to normalize death?
Well, I think if we can, there's so many things that happen when we prepare to transition. There's a physicality to it, a physical death, and there's an emotional component to it. And then there's all the fears that we accumulate from the time we're young, and religion comes into it, what we feel about the universe, what we feel about ourselves. So the resolution of a lot of those questions should be talked about, can be and should be talked about. I really believe that if you bring this quote taboo situation into the light, we're going to find that so many people will have an easier time transitioning. So my goal when I started working out in metaphysics was to bring the conversation of death into the light. And I've done that many times with people. You, like me, know you've been at a bedside, you feel the soul lift from the body. You can see it sometimes, you can feel its energy, and you know it's going someplace. Sometimes right before death, people receive visitors that are their guides to help them. So, but when I really realized that there was a life after is when I was 20 years old. I had a near-death experience and I went into the tunnel, and then I came back. So no one is ever going to convince me there isn't love and compassion once we get beyond our fear of what everything is. In addition to this, we have to help people resolve all the situations they have in their lives that are going to follow them from life to life. Regrets, unfinished business. There's just a lot of business to take care of before we get to the actual moment of transition.
Linda, do you think your near-death experience guided you towards your current profession?
Yes, but I was 20 years old, and when I got my degree, my PhD in metaphysics, I was 70. So the process took a long time with me. And it worked its way through a couple of different careers and a very long career to a realization that that was not what my life's work was supposed to be about. And I got a call from Sedona that you're going to live here. I got a call, go study metaphysics. And I follow those phone calls when the universe calls. I just go, okay, what do I do?
Same here. I do the
Yep.
same thing. And I did promise to the listeners, I'm sure death doula is a new term for most people. Would you just explain what that is?
Sure. I don't use the term death doula, even though that's a common term. I use end of life doula because I think we attach so much emotional angst with the word death
Good
that
point.
I want to say end of life. And that end of life is a whole process dealing with your family, dealing with yourself, and then getting ready for that transition. What I do basically, if I'm fortunate enough to be called in early enough, and sometimes I don't, I'm called in sometimes right at the very end. But if I have the time, I work through the person's story and their history and their life, and I suss out what unresolved issues there are. Are there things that need to be cleaned up before there's the transition? Sometimes it's writing letters to family members that are estranged. Sometimes it's making phone calls. It's certainly giving a lot of your stuff away that you want in particular hands, and to designate what you want your death to be like. Do you want to be conscious and we manage your pain medication so that you have a little bit of discomfort, but you can be fully conscious to face death? Do you want to be asleep? Do you want to be medicated? There's a lot of things to take care of. Do you want me to wash you after you passed? How do you want how many people should be visiting you? What kind of music do you want? There's a whole gestalt that we could get into if we have the time. And as I said, I don't often get that much time.
But how lovely. It makes me think of some movies about utopian societies. And to me, it was utopian. Some people freaked out about it, but I don't have that hang up. But it was that at a certain point, people just decide either at their age, they reach an age, or they just decide they're ready to cross and they go to this facility where they get to lay down in this comfortable bed and they hear the music they want and see these beautiful nature videos in full surround and get to pass peacefully at their time of their choice. To me, that's a beautiful thing. And that's sort of like a smaller version of that, is to give them what passing for them, what's perfect for them, as perfect as possible for them.
It is their death, and it is the passing and the loss for a family. So often families will start pre-grieving as we begin to approach that transition. And it's two separate tracks: the survivors of people who are passing and the people who are actually passing. And those two are connected, but often they diverge. Sometimes family gets scared at the end, and we have to take care of that. And it's really, again, it's really getting the conversation started. Once we get into the meat of the conversation, people will let me know what they want, because I want to hold space for whatever it is they need.
You know what's great about that, Linda, is giving so much control and power of that moment to the person who's facing their crossing. I think that helps a lot, but you're so right about this normalizing thing, because anything that all humans will go through is normal. We're going to be
Right.
born, we're going to get older, and I feel the same way about aging, by the way, and also death. And so I think that what you're doing is beautiful. I actually first started hearing about end-of-life doula from a friend who's studying it, who works for hospice or worked for hospice for a long time. And, if you're drawn to one, you'll be drawn to the other. But I think it's a beautiful turn. It's a turn in a direction for society to approach this in a whole new way that isn't such dread and fear and sadness. I mean, I think it's normal. It's hard to be the ones left behind. I've lost a lot of loved ones, particularly in the last year, but lost a lot of loved ones. And yeah, I'm sad and I grieve, but I know where they're at. I know what it's like over there, and they are not suffering. We are.
Yes, exactly. You know, what's interesting is that, and I've done this with a number of people that I've transitioned, I hold space for them to start asking questions, to come to their own series of terms with what's going on with them. And most people do at some point find an acceptance, you know, and then I wait for them to really get fully have their questions like, oh, will I be forgotten? I'm afraid I'm going to be forgotten. And I always say, you know what? If one person holds you in your heart, in their heart, you're never going to be forgotten. I won't forget one person that I've helped transition. So if I'm even the only one holding them in my heart, they're still immortal. They're still there. So it's important that they understand that there's things to come that are wonderful. And then I'll offer them, if the space is right, to talk about in great detail my NDE. And that really has settled a lot of people down about, oh, that's what it might look like, or that's what it feels like. My NDE, and I'll just describe what it feels like. A woman gets pregnant for a child. She has the child in amniotic fluid. The child is wanted and loved and is floating in this beautiful, beautiful liquid. That's what mine felt like. How could it be any better than that? Protected and loved and compassion. That's
Pure
what you're going to be
love.
walking into.
Yeah, it's pure love. And
Mhm.
I remember that I haven't had a near-death experience. I had a different kind of afterlife experience. Why, how important do you think it is that we discuss these kind of taboos that society has around death?
I think it's critical. I mean, so many people show up on their deathbeds begging for one more minute because they didn't resolve things, or fighting so hard and destroying their body and their psyches in the meantime, that their death becomes a grasping and a clenching, which is the opposite of what you want people to have. You want the last breath to be a sigh and a release. Go fly.
Oh, I love that. Go fly.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm going to remember that. What do you think stops most people from accepting and exploring the concept of death?
I think a lot of times it's the taboos that they received from us, how we grew up, how our parents dealt with death. In my particular case, when I was very young, I saw my step grandfather help my grandmother to her death, and I looked at it as an act of love. But my cousin next to me felt very, very differently about it out of fear. And I think we have these ideas that we're going to lose our identity, that we don't understand, that we only bring part of our energy here, and we're transitioning to go back home. I actually refer to it as earning the death, as refer as earning the right to go home again.
I call it home. Afterlife is
It's home.
home.
It is.
And
Mhm.
we are
So
eternal souls. We are eternal soul beings. So we are going home. But I think it's going to take a lot of education. And I'm so glad there's people like you who are really called to do this as your life purpose at this time to help people with the concept, with the actual process of death. So
And it's not complicated if you really just begin to have the time to talk to people and you get a feel for where they're at with everything. And then you can gently begin to shift the situation through your own experiences or by talking. Sometimes I would read theoretical physics to one of my patients and talk about energy transfer. And that helped him understand that our bodies were all energy, that this physical vessel was what we had for this particular lifetime, and that we're going to go someplace else with our energy.
something that I was reading about you is this concept of physical death versus spiritual and emotional death. What is the difference between those?
Physical death is what the body is going to do, and the body will often fight you to not let the spirit go, because the body has an idea that its time has come and it doesn't want to let go of the physicality of the actual life that exists here in the present moment. The spiritual death is the one that we want to go to. We want to have the body work with us to release the spirit. That's the ideal situation, which honestly, I've only seen a couple of times where people are clear enough to go, oh, I'm ready to leave my vessel now and I'm going to take my spirit and I'm going to go. So people get afraid when they lose this body that that's all there will be. And
Mhm.
now I'd really love to talk to somebody who felt like that. And then when they get the love and compassion, I wish they would just call me or dream me a scenario where I know that they've had a wonderful experience. And it's all that anxiety. You know, let's take an example, a physical example. A person has to have surgery. And all of the stuff leading up to the surgery is anxious and it's awful and you're terrified and something terrible is going to happen to you. And then you get there and you go under anesthesia and you wake up and you think, what was I so upset about? It was fine. But our monkey minds, which are very, very powerful, create stories and they're not usually great stories. So what we want to do is try to shift that to a more positive thing, which is, oh, I'm heading someplace now. I'm going to the ultimate vacation. However, whatever works for anybody.
Long time ago, a dear friend of mine, I was still young and I had a friend who was in her 80s and she was the coolest lady. She dyed her hair purple and she was just always bubbly and joyful. And when she passed, somebody read a poem at her celebration of life, and it was the one about when you cross from one side and people are crying and waving goodbye, and then you cross to the other side and there's all this crowd joyously awaiting your return. And that is so true.
It's true.
That I love that poem the best when it comes to death, because that is a good explanation of the process.
It is. And if we can set the side waving goodbye to understand that this is really a reason for celebration. Even when I run my grief groups, I talk about joy. I talk about creating good memories with someone who's ill and transitioning. I talk about the joy of it, how the person has gone on. Now, a lot of times I'll say to the people in the grief group, yes, your pain is extraordinary. There's no question about that. But tell me a memory that you have of one time where you laughed together, or where you know that your departed partner or friend did something that was really hysterically funny. And a lot of times we'll end up laughing. And people think, oh my God, I'm laughing in a grief group. No, that's exactly what your loved one or your partner would want you to do, to be celebrating their life. We get stuck and hung up in all of this stuff. And I'm not saying there's not a lot of pain, because I know there is. I've lost people too. But we have to somehow find a way, if we can start earlier in life, creating the concept of we're not permanent, impermanence. And if we could then start creating, let's make some good memories together, so that when we look back at a life with somebody, you'll go, oh my God, do you remember that silly thing I did when we went on that trip one time? Oh, and you have a time and a moment where you can laugh about it. That's the joy of it.
The first time that well, it wasn't the first time I lost somebody close, but I was at a dinner after the funeral service for somebody very close to me, and we all ended up laughing. And I could tell, like, all of us felt kind of guilty. I was probably, I don't know, 35 years old.
Mhm.
And we all felt a little guilty and weird. And then I realized it was really transmuting a lot of the negative emotions, and it felt lighter and the energy felt better. And after that, I've noticed that tends to happen. Like, there's more of the laughter and the discussing of beautiful times, funny moments. And I think it really does help people, the people left behind, to deal with that process so much better.
Sure. And a lot of times what we have to consider is that we are all of those negative things and the funerals and all of that stuff, it's fraught with a lot of baggage we carry as humans that we're not supposed to. We're not supposed to be smiling. We're not supposed to be laughing at that time. But you know what? I'm sure every departed person, I want people when I transition to go have a big party and to laugh about all the silly things. And there's a lot of them that I've done in my life.
I gave my
Remember the
daughter,
lingo.
I only have one child and I wanted to make it easy on her. So I gave her explicit directions. Here's the bagpiper you're going to call. A friend of mine used to be in a band with me. Here's the music. Here's what I want. I want a party. I want people talking about all the goofy things I've done and the fun things we've done together. I do not want a funeral. And I know she'll do that. She'll make sure that happens. But I love it when it's more of a celebration of life because that's what we're doing. We had the privilege of knowing that person in this lifetime. We had the privilege of connection with them when there's no guarantee a person's in our life forever or for any specific length of time. Everything passes, everything ends, including our lives. So I'm really hoping that talking about topics like this are going to help a lot of people. I know this topic of death is very much of interest to the spiritual community in many ways. So what's your thoughts on the best way to deal with people who have anxiety and fear surrounding dying? Is it anything more than what you've already said, which is excellent?
Well, I think I've often said to them, what would you like me to do that would relieve your anxiety? Sometimes it's holding a hand, sometimes it's putting a cold washcloth on a face, sometimes it's watching Animal Planet together. So I let them guide me because really they are the people that are going to be moving on. This is their death. It has very little to do with me, except I am the accompanying person to assist you. So the space that I hold has got to be totally theirs. Anything goes. You want me to go get you a specific sort of incense? I'll go get it. You want me to massage your feet with oil? I'll do that. Anything that will alleviate anxiety. Now, I find sometimes asking a person to tell me about their lives. Tell me about your early life and your childhood. And they'll start talking and they'll start lightening up and they'll start laughing about certain things. And it really takes away the edge of the anxiety. Listen, at the moment of death, it's very normal to have anxiety. You don't quite know what you're stepping into. You're stepping off of a platform into an ethereal space. So if you didn't have anxiety, it would be surprising. The point is to get you lined up so that you're not overwhelmed and fighting it and so terrified that your death then becomes an uncomfortable experience for everyone.
I would love to see a change where we start calling it a transition instead of death,
I've
because
switched my
that's what
language
it
to that
is.
too. I agree with you. It's a transition.
Yeah,
It's
we're just going
that,
from one place to another. Now we're in our soul is taking over, which is really who we are anyway.
and if
Um,
you start thinking about the little deaths in your life, you can start to embrace impermanence. Think about a career that you had that then ended. That was a sort of a death of that career, but the next day you went on and you figured out another one. And I had this realization a couple weeks ago reading about impermanence that, oh my gosh, my career was a 43-year career and it ended by my choice, but it ended. It's a little bit of a death. That shows me a level of impermanence. And it floored me. It just totally threw me because I hadn't thought of it that way before.
yeah, I have. And I had a similar thing. I know you had your background in doing voiceover work and managing talent. And I had a long career in radio and then a longer career in mental health. And leaving that was hard when my angels told me, now you got to move across the mountain, move to Stona, and you're going to do your spiritual work full time. I really didn't want to. And it was very hard, but I can look back and see now that I was guided to exactly where I'm supposed to be, of course.
Mhm.
And when it's time for us to cross, there's many reasons why it's time for us to make that transition. And
Right.
sometimes it's because our soul's job in this lifetime is done.
Mhm. That's correct. We fulfilled all of the agreements we made prior to coming in here. And we finished our work and we now need to go home and rest to see what the next potential lessons are, or if we're ever fortunate enough, and I like to think we are, we can just be absorbed into the energy and just hang out there.
I pray that happens.
Me
I hope
too.
I don't have to come back, but
Oh, me too.
odds are I will.
Yeah. I think I still have a lot of work to do too.
I don't know anybody who doesn't really. So, in your opinion, do we cease to exist after death?
No, 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 no. Now, let's go a little further, okay? When we cross over and we're with our guides and we go to rest and we do our life review, and these are all of my beliefs, okay?
Mhm.
And then we are working towards what are the next lessons? How did we accomplish it in this life? How did we do? And then how are we, and what do we need to accomplish? When we come in for the reincarnation, it is by the very nature of reincarnating that we have to put aside our memories of this life. Otherwise, imagine we had a couple hundred lives and we didn't get rid of any of those memories. We might be confused on a daily basis as to who we were, when, and where we were. So
I
we
do
have
think
to
we have that
lose that.
confusion.
But that's not ceasing to exist. It's the memories that we can't take them with us. And we both know there's a lot of bleed through also where people remember things from past lives and still have things they have to resolve. But cease to exist. No, we're energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, and that's what we are.
I've said this before on the podcast, back when we used to have this afterlife symposium in Scottsdale, and I was there as doing readings for people, but they had several speakers who are the top afterlife researchers at universities around the world. And they've come to the conclusion that most people have lived about 1,000 lifetimes. And if you think about everything you've experienced in this one current lifetime times 1,000, or even if it was times 500, the experience and wisdom that we're carrying within our souls,
Mhm.
it's bound to have a few leaks out. And I think when we're meant to remember, when we're meant to know something, we'll know it. But it is very interesting what we carry within.
Yes, and it's funny, it's people refer to it as a deja vu. It really, there are those memories of places, and I'm sure each and every one of us have gone to another place and thought, I don't know, this is way more familiar than I thought it might be. So is that bleed through? I think it is. I think it is. And when we're directed by the universal consciousness, like you were, and like I was, to move to Sedona, it seemed like the craziest thing. I had a fine career going on in New York. I wasn't doing anything other than just doing my career. And yet there was a little piece inside of me that was waking up saying, you have some more work to do. You're going to have to do a little more work on yourself. And then you're going to have to go to Sedona and you're going to have to study metaphysics and you're going to have to just live the rest of your life out there, 3,000 miles away from the rest of my family. It seems crazy to them, but I had
I'm
to do it.
sure
I didn't have a choice.
my family thought I'd lost it when I left because I was at the peak of my profession in mental health. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to Sedona and I'm going to do my spiritual work full time. What?
What?
They
Yeah,
just thought I was losing it. But yeah, I have to follow what my angels and my guidance is, my spiritual guidance. It's never failed me.
no.
What do you believe happens to consciousness when we transition?
Consciousness is preserved. I mean, we bring different pieces of energy in from the total energy that we have in order to help us learn our lessons. And then we go back to we go back after we do our life review and all of that stuff, we go to the great consciousness where we rest and we then begin to learn what our next life lessons are. There's no doubt about it that there's an incredible consciousness out there. It speaks to me on a regular basis. You know, a few days ago, I had a client of mine who had, committed suicide 9 years ago to the date that he contacted me. And that was June 9th. And he said, I have some things I need your help with. And it was 9 years and I thought of him, but not really on a regular basis. And I had some tasks I had to do and some things I had to help I had to help him resolve so that he could move. He said, I can't move to the higher vibration without getting these particular things done. So I think we got them done. I think so far so good. It's been all quiet on the Western Front, so I think it's okay. But that's really what we do. And his consciousness understood that in order to absorb to a higher vibration, he needed to clean up certain things left undone in this particular life.
I think part of that is making amends. And the reason I say that is because the people who were abusive to me, who've crossed, came back and apologized profusely in spirit form for what they'd done.
Isn't that
And
wonderful?
very different feeling.
That's wonderful. I
Yeah.
think this is what's going on here between this particular client and my former business partner. There were just issues between them and a fight occurred and it didn't get resolved before this client took his life. And the shock and hurt in the person in my business partner, that there was no longer possibility to resolve it. He didn't understand that it could be resolved in many different ways. But 9 years to the date, this kid came back into my life and said, I need help resolving this. And I like to think that the opening occurred. It also had to do with speaking, and you know this, speaking to my business partner's higher self. It worked brilliantly,
That's actually something I recommend frequently and
Mhm.
use myself.
If you hadn't talked to me about that, I'm not sure that his spirit would have been open to resolving these other issues. The opening had to be created first for that spirit to come in and make amends. So I think there's somebody pretty intelligent running the show.
Oh, there really is. And there's
Yeah.
miracles and everything about humans and our world, miracles.
There is.
And, you just have to see it. And I'm on a mission right now to encourage people to actively look for that so they don't get bogged down in all the dark stuff going on, because there's also a lot of light and beauty happening. And I
There
think
is.
you're part of that wave.
I think there's a
you're part of
number of us that are fortunate enough to have gotten the call to balance out some of the negative stuff. And I really think you need to look at your life and don't just call it a coincidence. Really look at it and see what it was and see how it connects to who you are. And you'd be surprised how much insight you'll gain into your life if you just take that moment and say, oh, I ran into that person. I hadn't seen that person for 30 years. Oh, there was a problem then. And you clean it right up and you go, okay, all good.
Yeah, it's wrapping up loose ends. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
what you're saying about what you're helping people do at that moment of just before they're transitioning is tying up loose ends.
Yeah, sometimes it's in the form of writing letters to
Mhm.
family, and I had one woman who passed rather quickly and we wrote letters. She couldn't write anymore, so she dictated the letters to me. I sealed them, she signed it, I sealed them, and then the day she died, I put them in the mail. So that's what I mean. We can start talking about what death is. And I'd love people to let me know. I ask people, please tell me, what are the things that bother you about it? What is it you're so frightened of? Or what is it you feel about it? What makes you angry about it? If we can get all of those, I'll refer to them as negative emotions, out on that table, we can maybe neutralize some of it and you can feel a whole lot better about living your life. Remember, people are living under a guise of anxiety, not knowing when their moment of death is going to be, because none of us do. So you're chronically living with that anxiety. We can eliminate that if you just talk about it.
I always tell people, I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of how it might happen,
Yes.
but I'm
Yes.
not afraid for the transition itself.
Yeah. Well, we can manage the way it can happen in many ways, in a lot of cases. We can manage it with the wonderful stuff that hospice does. We can manage that pain because that's really what, I don't know anybody that wants to elect for a painful death. So we can manage
No.
it. So we've got the technology now to have you be awake and have you be able to go to your spirits and feel maybe a little discomfort, but not extreme pain. No one should have to go through that.
No,
And no one
no
should
one
be
should.
alone either.
I agree. I agree. Just need somebody there with you to
Mhm.
witness and to support you through the process.
Right.
So, why do you think we die? I'm sure you've thought about that.
Hmm. Well, on the physical level, the physical vessel cannot sustain us to immortality. It's just not physically possible. It's like, this is probably a bad example, but I'll use it anyway. Buying a car and thinking it's going to stay with you your entire life. It needs repairs, it needs major things, and sometimes you got to give up the ghost and let the car go. So I think that's why we die. And now metaphysically, I think we die because we have completed our lessons here, and we need to go to the higher vibration to see what the next set of lessons are that we need to come back in to do, to make the world a kinder, more gentler, really beautiful place that we know it can be, to expunge a lot of this negativity. Listen, we have to have negative and positive because that's the balance of what we have. But right now we have an extreme of one side. So I think there's going to be a lot more people coming in, and I have great hope in the generation that's coming up that they are more metaphysically conscious. And I think they are. I think they're really asking the questions early on and not just living the life they think they're supposed to live, but to live, but instead listening to what their spirit is telling them to do. I've seen a lot of young people and people who come to the classes I give, and they tell me that their hearts are starting to guide them. And I think, yes, that's exactly what has to happen.
I've had parents bring children as young as 7 in to see me who found me, the children found me somehow and wanted to see me. And it was like speaking to an elderly, advanced spiritual person who'd been on the journey for decades.
I
So
think
I
a
know
lot of
you're
that,
right. These
yeah.
kids are coming in and they are aware. They are, I think they're here for a reason. And I know because the angels have shown me, we will have that world of peace and beauty and acceptance and joy.
We will. We just have to, listen, in order for us to get to the light, we have to pass through the dark, and we have to balance it. And if we had light all the time, that perfection would have to be balanced by some form of darkness. It's just a matter of balancing things correctly. And yes, I think these kids are coming in. Wow, the questions they're asking, it's really powerful.
I love meeting those children. I actually have a couple of my family that and various people's kids that are just they're profound little children. So, in your opinion, what was the point of all this life and death?
I passed through a number of careers that were really about the more monetary, what I refer to as a more kind of, as I matured, getting out of my own way, my selfishness, getting out of all of those psychological needs that I brought in with me and processing them, and getting to the point where I can do this. That's the point of my life. This is the point of my life. And helping people, we have to reach out to one another. No one can do any of this stuff alone. And we have to be willing to put our hands out and ask for help. And that is the point of life, and loving one another enough to help transition or to just help somebody have a good life while they're here. There's a lot of work we have to do. We have so much poverty, we have so much money in the world, and yet we have so much poverty and people who are not eating. We have a lot of work to do. So the more people we get who are consciously acting in these arenas, the environment alone is a big one that we have to deal with. And Mother Earth is extremely angry at us at this point.
Yes,
So we need to bring in these people, and they're coming to help. If we can get out of our own way, and that's what I always used to say to kids, get out of your own way. You can do miracles. We can change. We don't need hundreds of years to change things. We can change it a whole lot faster. It's sort of like accumulating a little army of very positive people who are conscious, who are going to go forth and do good stuff. And we have to, in our own way, do it. And even if it's one person you save on one day, it doesn't matter. You're doing the work. You're getting in there and keep doing. We can't give up on this.
I feel like when you shine light, when you're here to help people, you are shining a light. And
Yeah.
everybody you come in contact with gets to get a little bit of that light, and it lifts them up a little more and helps them start feeling the light themselves. And in that way, we start tipping the balance towards a better world. And
Yes, we'd have to get to that tipping point where we then start to get conscious. And as I said, a lot of these younger kids that are coming in are miraculous to me. And with the things that they're considering doing and working on are big earth-shattering projects. And I think, okay, all right then, we're going to be okay in spite of the darkness.
they are beautiful innovators. I see that.
Yep.
Linda, thank you so much for
Oh,
being on
thank
the
you.
podcast today. I have enjoyed this so much, and no doubt, if you're willing, I'll have you on again, and we'll talk about this whole concept of the death. And there's many different subtopics to cover with that. So we'll have you come back on, but thank you so much. And I will put Linda's contact info in the show notes so you can find it rather than trying to remember me saying it'll be written out for you in the show notes, whatever platform you're enjoying the show on.
And I would love to come back. There's so many topics we need to talk about. And, if we can get it out to the people, let's do it
All
as
right,
many times as we need to.
count on it.
Okay. Have a great day.
Join us next week. The topic is Real Angel Stories. It'll be part 3. So all new angel stories I haven't talked about before. And in the meantime, may your angels surround you. May your angels protect you every moment, every day of your life. I'll see you next week.